After the loss of the continent Atlantis, certain knowledge concerning the origin and significance of this same being Exiohari also survived, and this knowledge also began to pass from generation to generation. And so, about 30 or 35 of their centuries ago, when, after a big process of reciprocal destruction, the majority of them again began, as it usually happens there, in general after these terrifying excesses, often to see reality and to be less satisfied with the conditions of their ordinary existence. It so happened that the surviving fragments of the knowledge concerning the significance of being Exiohari reached in their authentic form to certain of them who had particularly strongly sensed the emptiness of their existence, and who had begun to seek possibilities by which they could somehow fill up this emptiness. In these, though fragmentary yet nevertheless authentic informations, it was very convincingly indicated that by means of the substances Exiohari or sperm formed in them, it was possible to perfect oneself. But unfortunately for them, there were no indications in this information which had survived and reached them what and how precisely had to be done. Then certain of them began to think and to strive persistently somehow to understand what was necessary to be done, in order, by means of these substances, inevitably formed in their presences, to struggle for self-perfection. The result of these serious ponderings of theirs was, that the conviction at first arose in them that this self-perfection could probably be actualized by itself, by abstaining from the ejection from oneself in the customary manner of these substances formed in them called sperm, and certain of them decided to unite and exist together in order to convince themselves in practice whether such abstinence could indeed give the supposed results. However hard these same beings of your planet who were first interested in this question strove to get clear about this, they arrived at nothing, and it was only the second generation of them who ultimately, long after conscious observations and intensive active meditations, categorically understood that this was indeed possible, exclusively only on condition of a ceaseless fulfillment of being park dog duty, and those of them, beings of the said generation, as well as certain of the subsequent 2 generations, who began seriously to actualize this, did indeed attain the expected results. But already the 4th generation of those beings who were first interested in this question, and who were followers, not from essence conviction, but from a property called to imitate, which had by that time also become inherent in these terrestrial 3-brain beings, also began to exist together and to do, as it were, the same thing. So, from that time it began and until now automatically continues, that such followers organize themselves in separate groups and sometimes form solid sects of various denominations and, putting this same abstinence as the basis of their aim, exist together segregated. Just these same places of theirs for segregated common existence together are called their monasteries, and the separate beings belonging to these sects monks. At the present time, very many of these monasteries exist there, and these innumerable monks who enter them do indeed strictly abstain from the ejection from themselves in the customary way of the being Exiohari or sperm formed in them. But of course, no sensible result at all is ever obtained from this abstinence of theirs, and it is not obtained because the thought has ceased even to enter the heads of these unfortunate contemporary monks that although it is indeed possible, by means of these substances exio formed in them, to perfect themselves, yet this can proceed exclusively only if the second and third being foods are intentionally absorbed and consciously digested in one's presence, and this is possible exclusively only if all the parts of one's presence have been accustomed beforehand consciously to fulfill both sacred being Parktol duties, that is, to fulfill conscious labors and intentional sufferings. It is, however, unjust to say that no sensible result at all is obtained among these monks there. There are even obtained among them sensible results of two independent kinds, so that you may understand why these mentioned two independent kinds of results are obtained among the contemporary abstaining monks. I must repeat to you once again that according to the fundamental cosmic sacred law of Heptapadaparshanok, if everything in general existing in our megalocosmos, the great as well as the small, does not receive in the process of evolution at the time of its passing through both Mudenel inns of the sacred Heptapadaparshanok, corresponding foreign help coming from outside, then it begins to involve back to those definite states from which it began its evolution. The same, of course, proceeds with the definite cosmic substances which are formed in the presences of these same terrestrial abstaining monks. And so, my boy, in consequence of the fact that these terrestrial monks, particularly the contemporary, do not intentionally aid the further evolution of these substances, inevitably formed in them from the constant use of the first being food, that is, do not actualize any being Parktol duty at all in their common presences, either intentionally or even automatically, and at the same time they do not remove these substances from themselves in the normal way foredesigned by nature, then these substances begin to involve in them themselves, and during this involution of being exiohari or sperm, there is worked out, among the many transient definite substances, which are in general formed in their common presences, by such an involutionary process, a definite transient substance which has the property of having two kinds of action on the general functioning of the planetary body of a being. The first kind of action of this definite substance consists in this, that it promotes the depositing of superfluous what is called karatsiag, or, as they call it there, fat. And its second kind of action promotes the arising and the dispersing over the whole planetary body of what are called poison ionoskirian vibrations. The consequence of all this is that in the first case, these terrestrial abstaining monks become extraordinarily, as it is usually said there, fat, and sometimes one indeed meets among these fat monks specimens with such an abundant deposit of fat that they could give many points to that form of being there, which they expressly fatten in order to increase this same fat in their planetary bodies. And this form of being they call their pig. And in the second case, on the contrary, these abstaining monks become, as it is also usually said there, meager thin, and the action of the poison ionosocrian vibrations which penetrate through them is chiefly evident in their general psyche, which becomes sharply dual, and the manifestations of which are divided into two diametrically opposite kinds, the outer, visible and for show, sensed by everyone around them, and the inner and hidden, which the ordinary beings there, especially the contemporary, are entirely incapable of ascertaining or perceiving, namely, in their outer visible manifestations, these poison ionosucrinian monks appear to be what your favorites would express as bigots of a high degree, and in their hidden inner manifestations not shown to others, what your favorites would call expert cynics also of a high degree. As regards the causes why poison ionoscranian vibrations are obtained amongst certain of the abstaining monks from the involutionary process of the exiohari instead of the deposit of fat, there would exist there even exists one very detailed theory there about this, worked out by certain, as they are called, Catholic monks, who, several centuries ago, proved in great detail that this proceeds because in the first year of their existence these same thin monks very zealously occupied themselves with that occupation from which pimples, known even to medicine there, generally appear on the faces of young beings there. For a full representation and understanding concerning the significance of this kind of abstinence among contemporary monks there, it remains for me to add that of which I became convinced during my last sojourn there among them, and namely that already, thanks to these consequences flowing from the involutionary process of the exiohari, the fixation of various consequences of the properties of the organ kundabuffer in the common presences of these unfortunate terrestrial abstaining monks has become greatly facilitated and has, in consequence, increased. At this point in his narrative, Beelzebub was interrupted by a ship's servant who gave him a lituchanbros, which he put to his ear and began to listen to its contents.